Let's bring in right now Republican presidential candidate, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Governor, thank you for being with us today. We obviously have a lot of issues we'd love to talk to you about, but obviously, I don't know if you heard any of our last conversation with Jonathan Greenblatt and Barry Weiss. We're going to, today, we're going to just talk about Israel, Iran, issues involved with that. We'd love for you to come back and talk about some other issues later, but I'm sure you agree with us that right now that's the pressing issue. And I want to ask you, first of all, if you heard any of what Barry Weiss said or Jonathan Greenblatt said. I know you've visited Israel many times. Give us your thoughts about the people of Israel right now and what the United States needs to do to support them.
Well, I'll tell you, Joe, I'm actually down in Bal Harbour. We just did an event at the Shoal here, and it's raw for our community down in South Florida. We have the second biggest Israeli-American community in the country. We have a large Jewish population that's really expanded a lot in the last few years, particularly with the Orthodox Jews. So everybody knows somebody who's been over there. People know people that are missing, and unfortunately, people know people that have been killed. This is perhaps Israel's darkest hour. This is a country that had to fight for its inception in the late 1940s. The Arab armies wanted to extinguish it in the Crib. Then they were going to get invaded in '67, and they preempted that in the Six-Day War. Then they did get invaded with the Yom Kippur War, and they were able to win that. And then they faced intifada after intifada. And then the level of barbarity, it's hard to comprehend. The images and the videos are absolutely disgusting. And I just think it's important as Americans that we all come together. Israel has a right to defend itself, and that means do that to the hilt. You have to uproot the terrorist infrastructure, these networks, and Hamas needs to be no more. I fear what happens in these situations is, yeah, people say Israel can respond. Then a week later, then 2 weeks later, then people start to blame Israel. There's no moral equivalence between a Hamas terrorist and an Israeli civilian, and they have every right to see this through to the hilt.
So, Governor, let me ask you about a mistake that not only we make in the United States, but Israel has made, unfortunately, in this case. And that is, with Israel, the belief that somehow Hamas could be managed through the years. You've been to the Middle East many times. You've visited Israel many times. And there was somehow that mistaken belief, just like the mistaken belief from our government through the years that somehow a relationship with Iran could be managed. I'd like you to begin with talking about the security failures in Israel, if you have any insights on how that happened. And then I'd like to know if you are president of the United States, or if you were president right now, would the DeSantis administration support an Israeli military strike either on Iranian military targets, Iran's oil infrastructure, which, of course, funds terrorism across the globe?
Well, on the former, I think it's too soon to tell. I don't have any inside information, but clearly this was an orchestrated attack. Israel prepares for things like this, and Hamas was able to have, unfortunately, a great deal of success. I think in the past, there may have been some people in Israel thought Hamas could be managed, but I also think that there was an impulse pushing against them taking care of Hamas once and for all, because they would always come under international commendation. People would start attacking Israel. I mean, how many resolutions has the United Nations done attacking Israel over the years? So I think that there was that practical political consideration that maybe caused some Israeli leaders to hold back. In terms of Iran, look, this is personal for me in the sense of I served in Iraq back in 2007, 2008. We were in places like Fallujah and Ramadi, mostly Sunni Arab al-Qaeda fighters at the time. But most of the casualties U.S. troops were suffering were at the hands of Iranian-backed Shia militias. They killed hundreds of our troops in Iraq, probably over 1,000. Of course, they were responsible through Hezbollah for killing our Marines back in 1983 in the Beirut barracks bombing. So Iran has a lot of American blood on its hands. Look, I think that Israel should be focused on uprooting Hamas to make this a larger role. I think does have some risks, but I would say the United States should turn every screw so that Iran is not getting money flowing into its coffers, particularly with their oil Israel. I think Biden's administration thought that there could be a rapprochement here. They eased off on some of the sanctions. There's been a lot of discussion on the $6 billion. I think that was a mistake, but they've been getting a lot of money leading up to this. The Iranian regime, when they're funding terrorism, it's not necessarily a practical consideration. This is their religious and ideological worldview. This is why they exist as a government, and you're just not going to be able to have a peaceful situation with a government like that. So turn the screws on them financially, dry up their ability to fund terrorism. You know, that's something we should all be able to agree on.
Yeah, we're obviously talking to Governor Ron DeSantis. If you're tuning in and expecting a conversation on domestic politics and the many things that we disagree on, as we've said, that can come another day, and we can have those debates on another day. Today, we're talking about the attacks in Israel, Hamas, and Iran. Governor, I want to expand a little bit on what you've said regarding Iran. Since 1979, they've been the epicenter of global terrorism. You talk about the Beirut bombing in 1983. They have had American blood on their hands for a very long time now, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Houthi rebels, whether it's Hamas, obviously, whether it's Islamic Jihad. But you also talked about in Iraq, that funding of terrorists in Iraq, that continues even through today, does it not?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, you've heard reports that you could have, Iran has said they could act against Israel, and then so could other states in the Middle East, including Iraq. And so, look, as a veteran of that conflict, it's definitely it leaves a bad taste in my mouth to see that country is basically a satellite of the Iranians, and you have the Shia domination, and they've not been the type of partner that people envisioned back in the day. Another lesson learned with respect to national security. But yes, those Shia fighters, that was the reason why Qasem Soleimani was put out of his misery by the U.S. government. He had been directing attacks against Americans for years, and that was a justifiable response against him.
Yeah, I want to talk. You brought up the $6 billion. And that a lot of Republicans have been talking about. But as you said, as you implied, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that $6 billion is not what funded the operation, but oil revenues have been allowed over the past several years to continue to flow back into Iran. I'm wondering, you're running obviously against Donald Trump in the Republican primary. I'm wondering whether you think it was a mistake for President Trump to have waivers, the waivers that he pushed back in 2018 to allow China, to allow India, to allow Turkey, to allow South Korea, where the $6 billion came from. Whether it was a mistake for him to grant those waivers to Iran, because as he said at the time, he didn't want to basically upset the flow of oil and cause prices to go up. Was that a mistake?
Well, so first on the $6 billion, I do think that what Biden did was a mistake. I think doing that deal sent the wrong signal. I think the fact that Iran was expecting that money, yes, that money did not go fund this, but I do think money's fungible, and it gave them the ability to potentially shift money elsewhere. I would not relieve sanctions on Iran. I understand that there's a lot going on with energy markets. One of the things I've been talking about in this campaign is expanding domestic energy production here at home. We have the greatest gas resources, tremendous oil resources. I know that cuts against what the Biden administration is trying to do with the Green New Deal policies. But in terms of our national security, that benefits us at the expense of Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and China. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're having to make those decisions.
That waiver, right? Back in 2018, you wouldn't have supported a waiver.
I've always supported. I've always supported from the time time I was a congressman now, the strongest possible turning of the screws on Iran and their energy. My view is anything that goes to that regime, they are not trying to make life better for the Iranian people. They are going to use that, and they are going to try to fund terrorism with it. And I think that that's a lesson. But I will also say this, Donald Trump's approach to Iran was stronger than his predecessors was, and it's been stronger than the Biden was. I think both Obama and Biden thought you could have a rapprochement with them. I don't think that that's possible.
The editorial board of the Israeli newspaper Haaretz noted in a piece titled "Netanyahu Bears Responsibility for the Israel-Gaza War." They said this: above all, the danger looming over Israel in recent years has been fully realized. A prime minister indicted in 3 corruption cases cannot look after state affairs. His national interest will necessarily be subordinate to extracting him from a possible conviction and jail time. And obviously, one of the largest newspapers in Israel says that his political battles may have distracted from his fight with Hamas. His personal battles may have done the same. Is that something that Republicans in the primary contest that you're having with former President Trump should be concerned about?
Well, first, with respect to Prime Minister Netanyahu, I was just out there in April, and I met with him. I found him to be very engaged on everything. Really was amazing, the knowledge he had about everything going on in the region, and that's a pretty left-wing paper. So I'm not sure that I buy that. I think that he has been engaged. Look, going forward as Republicans, my argument's been very simple. If the election is about Joe Biden's failures and our positive vision for the future, which it would be if I was the candidate, we will win. If it's about what piece of paper or document was left at the toilet at Mar-a-Lago or all these other things on January 6th, if that's what the election's about, then it's going to allow Biden to be in his basement, and they are going to be able to do it again. So just a question for Republicans about what do you want to be talking about?
You talk about a toilet, it's something being that really brings up an issue I wasn't going to bring up. But let me ask you really quickly, because we're about to run out of time. Should Americans be concerned? Are you concerned by the fact that President Trump revealed war plans to invade Iran and military attacks against Iran to people that didn't have classified ability to see those documents?
Well, look, I think that's an allegation. It remains to be seen. Obviously, if it's proven, that'd be a different thing. But I would just note, and I think this is why a lot of Republicans are concerned about some of these cases, is that he was being attacked for years as being in collusion with Russia, and that was not accurate. That was a false narrative that was created, and so I'd be remiss if I just dove in and accepted all those things. I think he has his day in court. I think he's innocent until proven guilty. But the reality is, we are dealing with this situation. And if the election's a referendum on all those other issues, if we're not talking about inflation and interest rates and the border and crime, then that gives the Democrats a huge advantage to try to retain power.
You're saying if the election's about Donald Trump instead of Joe Biden, then that is bad news for Republicans.
I think a referendum on Joe Biden means we win if I'm the candidate. I think a referendum on Donald Trump, if that's it, then I think the Democrats would win. Joe, there are millions of voters out there who don't like what Biden's doing, think the country's in the wrong direction, going in the wrong direction. They want to vote for a Republican. But once it's Donald Trump, that's just a deal breaker for them. They just won't do it. I saw a report, I think on your network, where someone said he was a Republican. He said it didn't matter. He would do Biden. That's just a reality that Republicans have to face up to if we want to win. And we saw these losses in the most recent elections, 2020, 2018. Let's give them America a chance for a fresh start. And I think that the results will be very positive for us.
All right, 2024 presidential candidate and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, thanks so much. Hope you'll come back and we can talk about all the other issues we didn't talk about today.
Thanks for coming on. And that does
Let's do it. We'll do it. Yep.